Hey there, and welcome to Keeping It Real with Tiff and Carl. I'm Carl Rabun,
I'm Tiffany Salcedo.
and it's great to be with you again. And so, Tiff, how's your summer going? How's it getting started?
Today is my first like official real life day off, kind of, sort of. And let me tell you, I've been on the road for 6 months straight. This is my first full week at home this year. And I am so excited. I'm going to clean this house. It's so dusty because I'm never home.
Yeah, I hear you. It's being on the road is it's rough. I was in I was in the foothills in Tuolumne County,
Ooh,
and
that's a nice
then
area.
yeah, it is a nice area, But
Yeah.
I drove early in the morning, so it was a lot of fun. I love that drive up there
Yeah.
to the mountains and the foothills, and we
Yeah.
like to go to New Melones lake up there sometimes, and so it's real cool. And then I ended up going to Coalinga at Harris Ranch. If anybody knows Harris
Mm.
Ranch on I-5, you can smell Harris Ranch coming and going. But
You can.
but you also have world-class barbecue and steaks, and it was definitely that's something I look forward to. And the people there are always nice to me, so I definitely enjoy that. But you know, it's it every time I travel, I'm feeling it more and more.
Yeah.
I don't know about
Yeah.
you.
No, I don't know. There's like this luxurious feeling of sleeping in my own bed that just cannot be beat. I went away for the weekend too, not for work, but we went to Salt River in Arizona, which I had never been to Arizona officially before. Like I've flown in and out of Phoenix, but I've never actually, well, I lie. I stayed in Flagstaff one night a couple years ago, but I didn't actually explore Arizona. It was just like a pit stop on a road trip. So I can't say I've officially like spent any good time in Arizona until this weekend. And it was a lot of fun. And we were with some good friends and we just had a really good time. So when I got home yesterday, I was like out, passed out. I slept so good last night. I'm so refreshed today. It's a great feeling.
Yeah, there's something said about being able to sleep in, which for me
Yes.
is 7:30 these days. God,
Isn't that
I never
annoying?
thought I'd get to that age.
Isn't that annoying? I am with you on that. I get so annoyed when I'm like, I'm gonna sleep in. I'm gonna sleep till noon. And then I wake up and it's 6:42 and I'm like, what is going on? And now I'm awake. So now I have to get up and be a productive member of society, which I don't appreciate. I wanted to sleep all day. So stupid.
I don't
Hate
know how I
being
feel
old.
about being I don't know how I feel about being a productive member of society, being called that at least, right? So funny. I always
Uh,
tell people still feel like I'm that 15-year-old kid, except with a little more patience, a little more self-esteem, and a little more knowledge of the world. And
yeah.
it's just interesting.
Yeah. No, it's funny because I feel like in my body, even just floating on the river where all you had to do was sit on an inner tube and just float, my abs hurt, my legs hurt, like you've got to move and whatever. I was like, I just floated down a river for 4 hours. Why do I feel like I did a whole aerobic exercise? I think I need to reconsider some things in my life. I do have a six pack today though. I can tell you that much. I can feel it. I have a six pack.
You can
It's
feel
under
it.
there. It's under a bunch of stuff, but it's there. I can feel it. Good
Yeah, yeah,
times.
well, it's always there. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, right on. Sometimes it's empty, sometimes it's full. But
that's right. That's right.
okay. So today we're just we talk about leadership. We talk about
Hmm.
experiences and training and communication. And today, we were talking about what we wanted to discuss, and Tiff had on her mind, the idea of the dreaded drama triangle, right?
Hmm.
And just thinking about, if people haven't heard of it, Tiff, you want to just take us through it and why it's been on your mind?
Well, I will say that the reason I think about drama is that we get so distracted by drama in life and in work. And the dreaded drama triangle comes from a researcher named Karpman, and he talks about like the three dynamics that really keep us from progress. The three dynamics, it's the three roles in this dynamic. You have a victim, you have a persecutor, you have a rescuer. And any one person can be in all three of these roles at any given time. If you don't believe me, I will give you like one of my family members' phone numbers. You can talk to them for any given time. But the reason that I think about this is, as we were talking about leadership and different leadership styles the last time, there's always pluses and minuses, but how people like really perceive what the leader's doing, they can absolutely fall into this dreaded drama triangle. And it takes a lot of time away from the work because people are so kind of, I call it like spiraling the drain of complaint and blame and pointing the finger, that no real progress, and it keeps us stuck. It's like, I don't know. I'm from the Gen X where we were afraid of quicksand. Like that was one of the biggest fears. I think it comes from the movie The Never Ending Story. Remember when the horse? Yeah. So we all have this fear.
Artax.
I know.
Artax.
Yeah. So we have this fear of getting sucked into this quicksand. But I think the drama triangle is like today's version of that, where we get sucked into it and we get stuck in it. We just kind of spiral from one role to another. And of course it means that we don't ever take accountability for our contribution. It's always somebody else's fault.
Yeah. Yeah. That externalization is definitely, disabling, right?
Right.
And it stifles us, right? If we're always thinking about, oh, something always bad happens to us. Why does it happen to me? Why do these people do this? I can't do this unless somebody else is doing something else, right? And it
Right.
keeps us away from being creative, right? Because if we're
Right.
too busy blaming somebody else, how can we ever fix it, right?
Yeah.
That's one of those
Right.
things, we always talk about. If being accountable means you can change something. If you are waiting for someone else, if it's someone else's fault, you got to wait for them to change it before you can ever get any better. And
Yeah.
then we get into that that spiral, like you mentioned, and that quicksand for sure. And the more you struggle with it, the further down you go. So,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
but
When I think about that drama triangle, I think of that meme with Spider-Man where they're all pointing at each other. That's
yeah,
to me like the exact representation of what the drama triangle is, because everybody is suffering. There's not one person in the drama triangle who's really happy.
yeah,
Everybody's suffering, but they're always blaming somebody else. And that's why those, if you look at the diagram of it, the arrows are all pointing at each other because it's always somebody else's fault. It's not me, it's you. And again, it's just a waste of time. Waste of
yeah.
time.
And if the victim says, "Oh, these people and they're doing this to me," the persecutor can say, "Well, look at yourself and look what you're doing, and you shouldn't be doing this. And why are you pointing at me? And why are you blaming me?" Or they'll also say, "You're right, girl," or "You're right. Yeah, that's just a mess." And but they'll never change. So why deal with it? It's just what we have to deal with, and then we end up having to deal with things rather than actually addressing things, right? We're just putting up and tolerating the way it always is, right? Because we're never moving forward.
Right. Well,
And it's such a
yeah,
challenge.
it is. Let's break down these different roles and how we can all fall into it. By the way, this dynamic, for me at least, is 100% rooted in emotion. It's that first instinct. It's a very reactive, first instinct fight or flight response to anything that's happening around us. And I think that our egos really play into this drama triangle, because our ego, when we're like thinking about like what's happening, filters through all of this information, and we're almost always the hero of our own story. And we're doing everything right and everybody else is to blame. If everybody could just be like me, the world would be a better place. That's the story our egos tell us. So for me, it always centers around that victim mentality. Like, poor me, if everybody else could just do what I needed them to do, then life would be easier. But it really, for me, the emotion that comes from that victim mentality is the feeling of being helpless or hopeless. So, helpless, there's nothing I can do, so why try? Hopeless, no matter what I do, it doesn't change anything, so why try? And so it really is
Mhm.
like a place of resignation where you're just like, everything sucks and I'm just going to go through the motions, and make sure everybody knows whose fault it is. And it's definitely not me. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Then we have
And
the
I always, yeah,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, no, no. Go ahead, Carl.
Oh, no, no, go ahead.
Oh,
I'll
okay,
go off
all
too.
right.
So
I was
yeah,
like,
yeah,
because then
yeah.
that goes to the persecutor. The victim feels bad. They're feeling helpless and hopeless. They have to blame somebody or something. The persecutor is the person that they blame, and it doesn't have to be a person. It can be a situation. It could be a circumstance. It could be, you know, poverty. It could be the weather. It can be anything that people want to blame for their suffering. It's just not me, it's everything else. And so the persecutor, which apparently I also like to call the perpetrator, every once in a while the perpetrator comes out. This is the victim blames the persecutor. That's the reason for their suffering. I'm suffering because of, and fill in the blank, that's the persecutor. And what I find kind of funny is that when I look at the victim and persecutor roles, what I've noticed is that when you look at those dynamics, it almost is always reversed. The persecutor is victimized by the victim, and the victim is persecuted. Like it's almost always they think they're in the opposite way. So, like in a workplace perspective, the victim might be like, "Oh, I've got so much work. My manager has these unreasonable expectations. I can't believe they're making me do all of this extra stuff." And so the persecutor's management and the victim is the employee. But then if you flip it around, the persecutor's like, I don't understand why people can't just do their job. I don't understand why people are putting so many conditions. And now they're the victim and the employee is the persecutor. So it's almost always swapped from that perspective. The persecutor never understands that they're the persecutor. They think they're the victim. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts here?
Well, go ahead and finish with the rescue, and then I'll
Okay, okay, okay,
yeah,
good. So now we
yeah.
got the rescuer, and the rescuer is the person or thing that the victim goes to for temporary, and the keyword here is temporary relief. So if I'm a victim, I'm not going to go to the persecutor and tell him to fix the problem. I'm going to go to a rescuer who's going to say, poor, pitiful you. I feel so bad for you. That shouldn't be happening to you. So the rescuer is the person that either saves you from the situation or at least makes you feel better about it. If anybody ever goes and vents about a situation, venting is a very, very victim behavior. But the rescuer doesn't also have to be a person. It could be a bottle of wine. It could be drugs. It could be gambling. It could be shopping. It can be, exercising at the gym for 4 hours or other behaviors that you don't really fix the problem. You just take your mind off of it. The problem still exists, but you're rescued from the pain and suffering from feeling like a victim. You just put it somewhere else. So when I think about like the victim and the rescuer, the victim feels bad, the rescuer makes them feel better, but they don't fix the problem. And that's why this cycle is repetitive. The other thing I think about when I think about this dynamic is between the rescuer and the persecutor, there's a relationship. And I think that the relationship is like, why are you like this? So, from the persecutor's perspective, they look at the rescuer and they say, why are you enabling this victim? Right? They need to get their life together. They need to do this. They need to do that. And you keep enabling them. The rescuer is looking at the persecutor going, why are you so mean? Why are you so strict? Why do you have such high expectations? And so they also have a very, again, blameful relationship as well, wishing that the other would change. But the wild thing about this whole dynamic is that all of these people are very communicative about their problems, just not to the right person. Just not to the right person. And so it perpetuates over and over and over again. And now I'm done. And now I'm done.
I was going to mention, with the victim and the persecutor, it's just like in retail sales, and that's something I hear a lot. Oh, these customers, but then the people that are complaining about customers when they're customers, oh, the staff here and the staff this, right? And it's so they're constantly, going after each other, and why are people yelling at me? And that definitely can be a challenge. And then, the rescuers, I want to speak to your supervisor, and the rescuer can come in and, either, usually supports the customer, but tries to explain away the situation with the victim, right? I ran into this one time when I was working for a bank, and, our, my boss and her boss, her boss was a C, right, for disc. So,
Mhm.
which is very contemplative. He wants data. He wanted time to think about things and to be able to make a measured decision. Well, she was a D who we put this together. It's well thought out. It's rational. Just say yes. And so he would want her to just say, I mean, she would want him to just say yes. And he
Mhm.
said, I need more time. I need more data. Well, we gave you all the data. We gave you all the presentation. There's nothing else you need to know. Thank you. I still need more time. Right. And so she would come and vent to me, who is an S. And, I would say, well, he really needs that time. He has to put his name, on it, and he really has to validate it. And yes, we did give him a thorough presentation. We did all the work on it, right? So, of course, I understood where they were both coming from. So I was trying to soothe both of them, right? And so it's an interesting dynamic and how that happens all the time, and but there's actually, there's a lot of the data, there's a lot of research that points to why we play these roles, right? And the victim, very often we, like you mentioned, the story, right? And so we externalize problems, right? If there's something going on, it can't be me, right? How do I, how can I do something wrong? I'm trying to be the nice person here. I'm trying to address something. This stuff is happening to me, right? And that's that first response you mentioned. It's all emotional, right? It's all that limbic and chemical responses. And so, this is happening to me. Why are they doing this to me? Why does it always happen to me? And we're going to remember the stuff that's negative more than we're going to remember the stuff that's
Mhm.
positive or status quo, right? And then so we externalize it and personalize it. We were just talking when a policy change comes and it affects you, that first response might be, what did I do wrong?
Right.
Right? Why are they doing this to me? When there might be 1,000 other people who are affected by it, but our first response is, well, they must be about somebody else because it wasn't about me, right?
Mhm.
And so we are externalizing who's doing this to us and personalizing why are they doing it to us, right? And so that's something to really be careful of. And then that persecutor, that's how our brain works, right? Our brain wants to assign blame. There's something going on, we don't know what's wrong, so our brain has to connect the dots and say, who did this and why did they do it, right? And so we're looking for causes, we're looking for ways to connect those dots so that we can move forward. And so that's our first response. It's just like when we talk about trauma-informed practice, rather than what's wrong with this person, thinking about what happened to this person, how do we learn more about what happened, right? So the persecutor, that first response is what's wrong? What are we trying to, we're trying to find whose fault it is. And then the rescuer, like you mentioned, either they can support either way, right? So they can be, super problem solving, right? Especially task focused folks. We talked about task focus in the last couple of episodes, right? Task focused folks will focus on how to solve the problem. So they're hearing the victim's problem, they're hearing the persecutor talk about the problem, and they're immediately going to a solution. Well, this is how we solve it. So let's move forward. Right. So I put a patch on a gunshot, like you mentioned, right?
Mhm.
Or there's that, soothing, right? So yeah, poor you, and that's not fair. And I don't know what to do, and I'm really sorry for you. And sometimes it's sympathetic like that, and then also it's very empathetic. And there's reasons we do that, right? Problem solving gives us a dopamine hit, right? So that chemical gets released, and we feel good solving problems. If you're a puzzle solver, you like Wordle, crossword puzzles, or you just like solving problems, you might be that problem solver at work, and also problem solvers for your friends and everything else like that. Coming to that solution gives you that little rush of dopamine and makes you feel better, right? And so sometimes we get addicted to that rush, especially if we do it a lot and we're looking for that. And then also the empathy, gives us that oxytocin, chemical rush, that idea of love and empathy, right? So
Mhm.
being there for people in that sympathetic and empathetic area where we can help people feel like they are attended to and cared for, right? Now, what's the problem with both of them? We're always solving people's problems. Do we ever really hear what the problem is,
Mhm.
right? Do we just try to solve problems before we even get to the root of the problem? So it's really putting that patch on a bigger issue. And then if we're constantly just being empathetic, do we ever get to a solution, or are we just there to make that person feel better? And how easy can it be? Well, that's just how they are, and you just have to deal with it. But I'm here for you if you need anything, and leave that open-ended so that they can keep coming back to you, so you know that you feel appreciated and wanted. If I'm not careful, that's the role I will fall into on a regular basis. That's one thing that they talk about with this is we have all three of these. Like you said, it's interchangeable sometimes, but there might be one we like to fall into, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Especially with the rescuer and the persecutor, right? So yeah, I know I can easily fall into the rescuer role if I'm not careful. Do you have one yeah, not that you like to fall into, but maybe you just, kind of goes with you a little more naturally?
I feel like I go back and forth between the rescuer and the persecutor,
Hmm.
to be honest. And the thing with these roles is they're very seductive. I mean,
Hmm.
they're like, come here, come
Yeah,
here. So
yeah,
for me, like as a rescuer, I'm naturally a very compassionate person. And so I want to be helpful. I want to be helpful. And there's like a fine line between helping and creating dependency. And that's one of the things
yeah,
with rescuing is that it's a very dependent type of relationship with people. And so I may avoid helping people be accountable by doing the things for them that again create value for me as a person.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
instead of like, let me help you do this by yourself, like I can do it for you. Let me help you out here. Let me be the hero in your story. Like, oh, Tiff really came through for me and did this. So I feel better about being a rescuer because I feel
Hmm.
like even though that's like again it creates a bit of dependency, I think the intentions behind it are a little more nuanced on the positive side because the real desire is to help, even though again it doesn't help long term, but it feels better to say, "Oh, I rescued somebody," than to say I was a persecutor.
Yeah,
However, as someone who really loves accountability, I do fall into the persecutor role, especially with people who are acting like victims. When I'm like, you have options,
yeah,
pick one.
yeah,
Like I get really frustrated. And that's, by the way, remember we said this is rooted in emotion. From the persecutor perspective, it's a lot of times rooted in frustration, impatience. Like, why can't you just do what you're supposed to do? Like a lot of blame. Like, it's not that hard. Get your life together. That's
yeah.
the persecutor role where uh, I tr- I might start in the rescuer, but if I'm trying to help and you're not being helped, then I'm going to fall into a rescuer. Like, oh, apparently you just want to suck. I don't know what to tell you at this point. And that's not a healthy place to be either. By the way, neither of these is more destructive than the other. These are all
There's
equally destructive. So you can't
and
be
the,
like, "Oh, I'm just a rescuer. I'm fine. I'm good. I'm
yeah,
a rescuer, so I'm better than everybody else." No, no, no. Because this dynamic, they all feed on each other.
yeah,
But I would say I don't think I fall into victim so much. I don't really feel victimized. And by the way, the victim doesn't have to have any real victimization. It's the sensation that I'm being victimized. There's a
mhm,
problem that I'm blaming somebody else. There doesn't have to be any
right,
real persecution for someone to feel like a victim, but there
yeah,
can be. There
yeah,
can be real persecution.
yeah.
But I definitely will say I probably start in the rescuer and I almost always end in the persecutor role for sure.
Yeah, and there's biological and neurological reasons why all three of these are there, right? I mean,
Mhm.
if someone is, victimizing you, it's important to recognize how you're feeling and to be able to voice that, right? So there's definitely that. It's not always woe is me and why is this happening to me. It's sometimes this is happening to me and I need to be able to express that, right? So there's definitely a positive. The persecutor, yeah, we if we see a pattern of behavior and it's legitimate, we need to be able to analyze that and assign blame. If there's something that is definitely an issue, it's important to be accountable. Like you mentioned, it promotes accountability, and with the rescuer, problem solving and empathy are, the hallmarks of being
Mhm.
an effective leader, right? So that's definitely an important thing. It's just when it's used in the wrong way or used, in a regular, place, then these become really damaging, right? And so like with the rescuer, we can train our staff to rely on us, right? Where we're not building capacity, we're not building bench strength, we're not having them solve their own issues. And then what happens? We train our folks to come talk to us. And then, if we have any other work that we need to get done or any other things that, you know, um, we would like them to be able to develop, it's not going to happen because they're always going to come to us, right? And so that, like you said, it's very enticing and it's it can be addictive, right? Come to me with your problems. I'm here to, rather than, hey, you know how to do this,
Right.
right? Go ahead and try to take care of that. So that can
Yeah.
be that can be a challenge, right? So
Yeah. I think it's just a very addictive dynamic just in general. And again, part of that comes from that I don't have to take accountability.
yeah,
And when I use the word accountability, I'm not talking about like punishment. It's really just like ownership of my contribution, good and bad. It's really
mhm,
easy for me to look at somebody else and said, you coulda, woulda, shoulda, which is a form of judgment. It's even more difficult for me to look at myself and say, what could I have done better? Or what should I do
yeah,
now? Or,
yeah,
what would I have done if I had had more information? That requires a bit of vulnerability and um, you've got to be able to admit that you were wrong and not everybody's in that place and that's why we get stuck in that drama triangle for
yeah.
sure.
And and people use this, and it's we definitely want to promote, not being a victim, being accountable, right? And you know, um, make doing these things in a healthy way. But so, just making sure that we don't fall into these using this as a weapon, right? We don't
Right.
weaponize these models, right? I mean, people can come to you with legitimate issues and things that aren't working. And I mean, I've heard it. I'm sure you have as much as I have, right? There's definitely something going on that hasn't been challenged and or hasn't been addressed. And well, they're just being a victim or you're just playing a victim role. And I mean, both you and I have both worked in situations with clients in human services, right? Where, a lot of folks they always talk about clients not having accountability. Well, there's some times where the situations that some of the clients are facing are legitimate issues that have not been solved and that they can't necessarily solve without help, without assistance, right? I mean, it's when, people always say, well, if they just find a job, then they won't be on welfare. Well, it's not just about the job; it's about affording homes, being able to afford school, being able to afford childcare, find time during the day to take care of things. My daughter was just going through, an idea of what it would cost to live on her own, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she asked, how much do you think it would cost to live on your own? And I said, well, if you're paying rent, they usually ask you for three times your rent in terms of income. And she said, so if the rent's 2,000, you have to make $6,000 a month. I said, yeah. And, and she's somebody who's making 20 bucks, 20 bucks an hour with that, and so it's something where that can really add up. She goes, oh, so that's why a lot of people have roommates. I'm like, there you go. Right.
Right.
So,
That's
but
right.
just, but thinking about, what if you have three kids and one of them has special needs and you can't necessarily always rely on other things or traumas ensued, you're a single parent or anything else like that, where there's those barriers that not everyone sees because they just see that person on the surface who might be frustrated, hesitant, maybe blaming, things that other people don't necessarily always understand. And you can see how people can say, well, they're just playing the victim. Well, sometimes understanding what it means, what you're dealing with is not playing the victim. It's actually calling it for what it is, right? How do we help people, enable people without being the rescuer? How do we
Right.
enable them to be in control of their lives, right? So that's definitely a challenge. And it's not just even in the welfare to work world. I mean,
Right.
in the work world, I knew a case manager who used to go to a boss 8 to 10 times a day to ask them to solve or to give the okay on processes he'd been doing for 10 years. He already knew how to do them, but he had to get my boss's okay. And the boss kept letting that happen. And it really wore her out.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it said, just every time you're interrupted, right, it takes what, 5 to 24 minutes to get back to the same level of focus you're at before you're interrupted. So imagine 8 to 10 times a day. If you're one of those folks who need that full 24 minutes, that's hours a day of unfocused work because you have trained your staff to come talk to you about everything rather than saying, hey, what would you do? How would you solve this? This is something that you do on a regular basis, right? How comfortable do you feel? How can I help you to feel more comfortable to make these decisions on your own? Because hopefully that's where, we would like you to be, especially after 10 years.
Yeah. But you know what's funny about what that even that story? So the boss is rescuing, right? The person asking
Yeah.
the questions is the victim. The boss is rescuing. And now the boss is upset because I don't have any time to do my other work. And now they're the victim and the employee is the persecutor. And they're gonna go complain
Yes.
to somebody else about, oh my gosh, this employee just doesn't get it. And,
Yes.
yeah, they should get it by now. They've been here so long. And the cycle continues. When you were
Yeah.
talking about like the clients having things going on in their life, a lot of times, especially in human services, we look at our clients as the victims, right? People
Mhm.
like, oh, they just need to get the job. That's again very persecutor mode. Like if they wouldn't be here if they could just get a job, right? Not taking into consideration all of the other things that they have going on. But what I find is ironic is that the employees oftentimes in the workplace are the victims. They're the
Mhm.
ones blaming management, blaming the state, blaming the government for all these rules, regulations, and policies, and I'm overworked and underpaid, and that's why I can't perform at a higher level, which again, those conditions are real.
Yeah.
But it's funny because it's like when it's happening to me, it's not fair. But when I have the power and control over somebody else, they just need to these are the conditions they need to succeed, regardless of what's happening. They just need to do it. But when it's
Mhm.
happening to me, like, oh no, these conditions are not perfect. How do you expect me to perform in these conditions? But they're not giving that same type of latitude to people who are in active crisis, right?
Right.
It's just an interesting parallel that you
Mhm.
can be in. If you see somebody else, so here's the bottom line here. If you see somebody else in one of these roles, you're there too. You just have to
Mhm.
figure out what role you're in. So if you're like they're
Yeah.
a victim, then what are you? Are you the persecutor or are you the rescuer? If you're like
Right.
they're persecuting, well, are you the victim or are you the rescuer? Because you can't have one without the other. All of these roles have to be present for there to be a true dynamic.
Victim has to have a persecutor or a perpetrator. I grew up learning perpetrator as well. So,
Yeah.
so
I
yeah,
just changed.
so
I just like the word perpetrator. So
me too. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, you have to have, a person that is victimizing you,
right.
in your own mind, right? And we look for that rescuer to validate our victimhood,
Well,
right? And
yeah, and it doesn't have to be a person. It can be a situation. Again, like right now, I can say 2024. What is everybody complaining about? We're short staffed. We're short staffed. Everywhere's short staffed. We just don't have enough people working. And so when I'm the victim, I'm like, oh, I could be so much better if we weren't so short staffed. I'm overextended. I've got more work than I have time. The persecutor is oftentimes the fact that we're short staffed. There's just not enough people to do the job. The rescuer is
right,
whoever you go to vent to feel bad about it. They're like, yeah, I can't believe your boss is asking to do all that extra work. That's not fair. People just don't want to work anymore, right? Or whatever people
yeah,
say, nobody wants to work anymore, which is, I don't know. That's just such a weird thing to me because everybody I know has a job. So I don't know who
right.
these unemployed people are that are just chilling, but whatever. Um, but we
Gen
blame, we
Z, that's
blame
who it is. It's Gen Z.
Gen Z, I know. Poor Gen Z. Gen Z are like the
Kids
hardest
these
working.
days.
They've got 14 jobs. They have 14 jobs. They're working everywhere. So
Exactly.
so it's
Yeah.
it's so funny because it's like that even perpetrates on that where I can't be effective because I have too much work. But let's blame being short staffed versus going into the other dynamic, which is what we have next. Like this is true, this is real, but what's the alternative, right? What do we do instead? Because I think we've all determined that this is not a good place to be. It's a time waster. It's an energy waster. We just spend so much time
Mhm.
talking about the problem. We don't look for solutions. So, like, what's the alternative? It's we start to look at what can we do? What are the options? How do we support each other? How do we hold each other accountable? How do we let go of some of the control and let other people solve their problems? That's the empowerment dynamic. So this is the alternative. It's like the inverse. You flip that drama triangle on its side. Um, I don't know how you learned about the empowerment dynamic, but I read about it in the book, The Empowerment Dynamic, The Power of Ted by David Emerald. And it was really insightful for me thinking about, okay, the drama triangle is real, but if you can switch your role in it, then it helps other people do the same. So if I were a victim saying, oh my gosh, I have more work than I have time, we're understaffed, I don't have enough people, instead of like feeling victimized by that, then I get into like creator mode, which I create my own destiny. I might look at it differently. Instead of saying, poor, pitiful me, I have so much work. I would go to, okay, I have a lot of work. I have less time to do it. How can maybe I look at my process to be more effective? How can I look at where I'm spending my time and reprioritize what's the most important? If I can't get it all done, what would be the most return on investment of my time? How do I look at that differently? What can I eliminate that's maybe taking a lot of time away? Which, by the way, being the victim is one of the first things that you can eliminate. Complaining about how much work you have gets actually 0% of it done. So how can I like look at what I'm doing and maybe do it a bit differently? And then I feel empowered. I don't feel powerless anymore. I don't feel helpless and hopeless. I say, well, here's what I can do. Here's like what I want. And then I can work towards that versus just feeling like a victim of my circumstances. So creator, let's create what we can out of what we have. And for me, I just go back to let's do the best we can with what we have.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
the circumstances will never be perfect.
Absolutely. So rather than saying, why does this stuff always happen to me? Right. And gosh, why can't these people ever change? It's what can I do
Mm-hmm.
to create that change to make it work for me? Right.
Mm-hmm.
Recognizing that I have some type of control.
Yeah.
Right. And that person who is the persecutor, who's assigning extra work or who is, telling you you're doing something wrong or whatever else it is now the person who is the challenger, right? Who is,
Right.
hey, this is something we need you to do. Hey, this is something that you can improve upon, right? Or, you know, um, you can do it. Yeah. So how are you gonna, so let's figure out a way to do this, let's figure this
Mm-hmm.
out. So the rescuer, rather than, helping that person feel like the victim and validate their victimhood, is actually validating their ability to
Right.
fix it, to solve it, right? And
Yeah.
so, how will you do it? What are some things that can help you to get it done? How can we help you to get it done, right? It's funny, Tiff, I'm doing a lot of 360, LPI 360, the leadership challenge, and people are, getting results, and I'm going through them with a lot of folks. And one of the things that I see is, um, I don't want to say, maybe it's a majority. If one of the lower frequency rated frequent questions, there's 30 questions, and they're rated on the frequency that you do these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not if you're any good at it. It's how often do you do it, right? People always say, well, I'm good at this, but why do they score me low? Well, it's not that you're not good at it. How often do you do it, right? You may be really good at connecting with folks, but maybe you haven't been able to, right? And so you're going to score a lower frequency rather than, it's not about your rating. So one of the lowest frequency um, questions I see on a regular basis is, do I provide feedback or do I ask for feedback from others, right? And you get folks who say, and mostly people will be on, oh, I haven't thought about that, or I just didn't think about doing that. We've been so busy, and I've just been pushing ahead. And I said, well, how often do you meet with your staff? And a lot of folks have really been meeting with their staff a lot, which is good, right? You're meeting one-on-ones. What the Harvard Business Review says, a meeting once a week for half an hour with your staff is best practice. Every 2 weeks, an hour, right? If you can't meet every week, right? Whatever that is, right? So you have folks that are meeting with their staff on a regular basis. I said, well, is that a question that you ever ask? Hey, is there anything I can do better? Is there something that I'm missing? How can I support you this week? Do you have anything that you would like me to do for you? I said, no, that's not something I ever ask, right? So as a coach, how can I support you rather than you being a victim and we're waiting and being reactionary to, well, you guys always do this or we never get to do this. And then I have to solve your problem in reaction mode.
Right.
How can I help you? How can I support you? And
Right.
I actually had one person say, well, I mentioned in the meeting, well, if you need anything, my door's open. I'm here if you need anything. Right. And so he thought he was doing, but he was getting
Mhm.
a very low score on asking for free. What, and I said, well, think about that. I'm here if you need me. That's a suggestion, isn't it? As opposed to what do you need me to support you with? That's a
Mhm.
very direct question. That's an assertive question, as opposed to, hey, if you need anything, I'm here. Right.
Right.
Which, so, if I don't need anything, or if I feel, even if I have a question, well, I don't want to bother. But what can I support you on? Well, let me think about that and I'll get back to you. And now that's something that is an assignment, right? That's something that is assertive. And I think that's an important thing to recognize with leaders. It's don't just ask folks, you know, or offer your services. As a leader, lead your services, right? In terms of this is what I'm here for. Talk to me, right? Be proactive and assertive in that sense.
Yeah. I think that that part of that moving from the rescuer to coach is really those very open-ended questions that really make people think versus the you can do it,
Mm,
right? It's I'm willing to listen to your problem without making it mine. Like that's the quote that always comes
yeah,
to mind when I think about the coach role.
love it.
I can hear
Yeah,
you, I can be empathetic, and I'm still going to put you in a position to take some action without me doing the thinking for you because I'm confident that you can think for yourself. So, not everything's coachable. Not everything is coachable, right? So someone comes to me and says, hey, I really want to do this work, but I need a blue pen. Where do we keep the blue pens? You're not going to say, well, where do you feel like the blue pens should be? Sometimes you just say they're over there in that drawer. But on other times, if you know that that person has the answer, maybe they just need to work through it. They lack the confidence or they're really unsure about what does this look like, then you can navigate them through that. So, I'm really having a hard time. My workload is overwhelming. I feel like I'm not being appreciated by my supervisor or my boss. So, okay, gosh, that's got to be really hard for you. I can imagine you're feeling pretty overwhelmed right now. What are some things that you can change in your workday that'll help you feel like you have more control over it? Or what conversations can you have with your boss that would let them know that you need a little bit more of encouragement? It's like, let's get to a solution versus just validating your feelings, which again, coaches can still validate how you feel and move you towards fixing the problem. And notice I say
right.
move you towards fixing the problem because as a coach, I'm not going to do it for you. That's a rescuer move, not a coach move. And I always think about coaching this way.
Yeah, yeah,
Even when the team is losing, you never see the coach put on the uniform and play the game. So I can support you from the sidelines. I can encourage you. I can skill build. I can help you with strategy. But what I'm not going to do is do it for you because that creates a
right.
victim.
Yeah, and that's the difference between coaching and mentoring, right?
Mhm.
So just, a coach is someone who's going to help you to become capable in thinking through, empowering you, enabling you to do those things. The mentor, can show you step by step. This
Right.
is where you go. This is the system that you utilize. This is how you put the password in. This is the screen you enter. When I was doing it, when I was engaged with clients, I used to do this or, things like that to, be able to help you with those tips, best practices. And the coach is helping you to really refine your critical thinking skills to be able to enable you to take those tips from mentors and utilize them effectively, right? So a good mentor can be a good coach, but a good
Right.
coach doesn't necessarily have to be a good mentor. That's why we see a lot of leaders who come into organizations that have no formal job experience in that organization still be good leaders, right? Whereas a mentor, just by definition, is somebody who's done the job before,
Right.
right?
I think the difference for me, like if I were to articulate that, is like a mentor shows you how they do it or how they did it, and a coach asks you how you want to do it or how you're going to do it. And
Right,
so it takes a little bit
right,
of that personalization out of it because the way I do it is the way I do it. It's not necessarily the right way or the only way, it's just my way. and I can
Yeah.
share my experience with you, and I can share like my best practices. But at the end of the day, a really good coach helps you figure out your best practices and your best way, and really encourages you to, like you mentioned earlier, the critical thinking, to think about it and take ownership over where you do have control instead of feeling like you're powerless. We didn't spend a lot of time talking about going from the persecutor to the challenger, which I think is a another important conversation, because challengers, um, they're not persecuting per se, but they still do create a bit of discomfort. Like challengers really do create discomfort for the sake of growth. And the way I think about this is like squats. I don't know if anybody does squats for fun. I don't know anybody, maybe a couple weirdos. There's my judgment coming out, but no,
I
not
see him at
weirdos,
the
but
gym all the time. So yeah,
healthy
but
people.
I ain't
But
calling him a weirdo because I don't want him to squat me. So
no, but most people don't do squats for fun. They do them because they want the outcome, right? I do
Mhm.
squats because I want the strong legs. I do the squats because I want to have great mobility. I do squats because I want to be aesthetically pleasing. Most people are not just doing squats because, like, oh, I've got an extra 10 minutes. I'm going to do some squats. That sounds like a good time, you know?
Mhm.
And being a challenger is I think very much similar to that. Like, it's not like we look forward to being a challenger. It's discomfort for the sake of growth. I've got to create a bit of discomfort for growth. And it's a little sore after a while. If you've ever had like a really good leg day at the gym, you got little Bambi legs the next day and it's a bit uncomfortable. But being a challenger is very much like that. It's about calling people to action, giving them that really honest feedback, being open to that feedback, and really encouraging people, not from a place of blame, but really about growth. If I have someone who maybe needs to improve their performance, as a challenger, I'm not going, as a persecutor, I might say, you just need to do your job. I don't understand why this is so hard for you. But as a challenger, you might say, you've been performing 10 tasks and you're supposed to be doing 20. That's the expectation of the job. Like, what do you need to develop to get to that space where you are going to be meeting those expectations? Right.
Mhm.
Or, I heard you say this, and the goal here is for us to be respectful to each other. How could you reword that in a way that's respectful to your coworkers instead of going, you're not supposed to talk to people like that, which comes off as,
Mhm.
condescending or whatever the case. It really
Yeah.
is pushing people to challenge like what they're doing and think about it differently without me imposing my thoughts on you. I'm just going to call out what needs to be addressed, not in a blameful way, but in a matter of fact, this is what's going on and this isn't what we want. And I'm going to put it on you as the creator to figure out what that looks like for you without blame, but really with
Yeah.
honesty. And I don't think a
Mhm.
lot of people like to be honest. Can I be honest about that? I don't think a lot of people are willing to tell each other the truth.
Mhm.
There's so much fear because I can't tell them that. They're going to go to HR, they're going to go to the union. So what? So what?
Mhm.
Discomfort. Because can I tell you, like, if we're really thinking about like how people are accountable in the workplace, you're either going to keep your high performers happy or you're going to keep your low performers happy. You cannot please both people at the same time. And what happens most of the time is that because the low performers are the ones that are making the most noise, that the supervisors, managers, leaders really try to placate those people who make the most noise at the expense of their high performers. And so what do high performers do? They leave and they go somewhere where they feel appreciated, because all of the attention goes to the loudest victims instead of really embracing like the people who are really doing the best they can given the conditions. What's their reward? Performance punishment. You doing such a good job. Here's some more work.
Yeah.
Congratulations. You've now,
Yeah.
all of these people who are victimized that say they can't do it, you get to take that on. And don't worry, there's pizza in it for you on Friday. There's some pizza,
Yeah.
Costco pizza at that.
Or the high performers, either they leave or they just shut down and just say, well,
I'm gonna act my
but you
wage.
don't, yeah, exactly. And they become, disgruntled or
Right.
actively disengaged, right? So,
Right.
but I think there's a fine line, there's a nuance
Hmm.
that goes between being a persecutor and a challenger, right?
Right.
So the persecutor can say, hey, look, you only got 10 to 20 widgets done. Like, you need to step that up, right? The challenger can say, you got 10 of 20 widgets done, and I know you know how to do the widgets, and I know that you did really well. You do them really well. How can we increase your performance?
Hmm.
Right? That's just like with, if I had a client who gave me 15 job contacts, right? And then you're supposed to give me 20. Okay, well, so what happened this week? Talk to me.
Right.
You have 20 contacts, you breach 15, the goal is 20. You've given me 20 before. What's going on? Right?
Exactly.
And then you go from that to the coach. How can you, if there's a
Right.
roadblock, rather than saying, well, let me solve this for you? No. So how can you address that?
Right.
Right? Maybe childcare went, bad one day. Maybe, your aunt, you're feuding with your aunt now. So let's talk about other options, right? What are some other things around you? What are some other options around you that can help? So we start developing their capability rather than, well, there's a licensed provider just down the road from you. You need to go talk to them. Just barking out those orders. That's even a rescuer solving your problem, right? So, I think it can be empowering, right? A challenger recognizes a deficit. A challenger recognizes that there's an issue to be resolved, but a challenger also empowers that person to feel like this is something that they can solve,
Right.
right? You have an issue. I know you can do it. I know you've solved this before. You know, let's fix it. What
Right.
can we do? Right.
Exactly.
And so that's being assertive and that's being direct, but it's also being empowering.
Right.
Right. And I think it comes down to just having those conversations with folks, not just about deficits. You see this a lot. You see the victim triangle a lot when people are, being talked to by their leaders just for what they do wrong.
Right. Right.
Right. When you see, we already talked about it in previous episodes, but the Lozada line and the positive to negative ratio, right? The latest data from Harvard Business Review says for high performing organizations, for every time you have a corrective conversation with your staff, you're supposed to have six
Mhm.
positive interactions with your staff, right? So, but it doesn't always have to be you're doing great or, Tiff, you're a rock star. I know how much you
I'll
love being
flip
called a
this
rock star.
right now. I will flip this table right now. Do not make me a persecutor on
Oh,
on film here.
go ahead, girl. That's your table. I'm just gonna watch you do it. I'll persecute. I'll persecute. Yeah, I'm gonna tell your husband. Look what she did. Look, see,
I know.
you've got
I'm
to
so
control your
triggered
wife,
right
right?
now.
Anyways, but
He'll come in and see the flip table and say, "Did someone call her a rock star?"
yeah, and now it's my fault, right? So yeah, I'm the persecutor, right? But it's performative, right? So how was your weekend? How was your daughter's birthday party, right? How's the move going, right? And things like that, where you know what people are dealing with outside of work, because people appreciate that you care about them as an entire person, not just as somebody who's, you know, um, putting out and performing, right? So, what someone does away from their desk is just as important what they do at their desk.
Right.
And so just having that conversation, saying good morning to people, right? Letting them know that you see them as a human being makes you human
Right.
to them. So that when you have that conversation with them about not producing enough widgets, right? They know it's coming from somebody who actually gives a damn about them, right?
Right.
So I'm talking to you about this performance, but I also talk about when you do something right. Low performing organizations, it's flipped. For every time you have a positive interaction, you have three negative, constructive conversations. How would you feel coming to work knowing that there's a 75% chance that when you talk to your boss, it's going to be something about negatives, it's going to be about something negative,
Yeah.
right?
No,
And,
it's draining.
yeah. And so how many people can become the victims? And how many people turn into persecutors, throwing other people under the bus so they're not the ones who are getting dumped on?
Yeah.
Right.
When I think about those positive interactions, it is that humanity, it is the connection with people. And this is not to say like you have to have deep personal relationships with people at work. That you don't. But you do have to see him as a person, right? Like, how have you
Yeah.
been? How was your weekend? You don't have to spend 45 minutes talking about it. I don't have to watch the video of your daughter's dance recital. I don't have to go that far. I can if I'm doing it equally, but to me it also comes down to like noticing when people are doing things right and just acknowledging that even in those one-on-ones, hey, you know what? One of the things I appreciate about you the most, Carl, is that you're always on time. Like I really appreciate that. I never have to wait for you. I never have to worry about what time you show up because you are consistently punctual, and I really value that about you. It could be walking through the hallway and hearing somebody on a tough phone call. And again, if I'm a leader and I hear someone tell a customer, you know what, you can kick rocks with no socks and get the heck out of here, I'm going to have to address that, right? Because that's a negative thing. But how often do we hear someone who's, on a tough call and they're being super professional? Do we go back to them and say, I heard you on the phone with that customer and they were really giving you a rough time, but you know what? You kept your composure and you really did go out of your way to help them. And I appreciate that about who you are. And it says a lot about your character. Like these are like the real genuine positive pieces of feedback and positive interactions that we can have with people. And I think we get so distracted by what can you do better? This like constant, you must improve, improve, improve. It's exhausting for people. And that's what I think leads to that victim mentality because I can't do anything right. I can do 1,000 things right and I never hear about it. But let me make one mistake and I have to have a meeting or a memo or an email about it. Yeah.
Or people think that you're supposed to just assume. I remember I had a feeling like that with my boss, and I'd gotten raises higher than anybody else on our team, and in our organization, but it tended to be negative feedback whenever I talked specifically to them. And so I one day I said, "Do I do anything right?" And my boss said, "Well, your paycheck shows that you're doing something right, right? That's what your paycheck's for." It always reminds me. Do you ever watch Mad Men?
Yes. Yes.
There's a yeah, that famous, I think what's called the suitcase, the show where it's just, Peggy and her boss, Don Draper, and they're arguing, and she says, "You never tell me I'm doing anything right." He says, "That's what the money's for, right?" And it just, I had a trigger. I was like, "Oh my God, this happened to me 15 years ago," right?
Yeah.
And so you see that, and so people think, well, that's they should know that I
Yeah.
appreciate them. They're getting paid. They should be lucky they have a job. Brene Brown talks about the at least syndrome, right? Well, at least you have a job. At least you have
Right.
this. At least is the least empathetic thing you can say to somebody, right?
Right.
You know, so just having that understanding that I see you and I recognize you. I had a conversation a couple weeks ago with a coachee, and he was talking about he has one person on the team that's not up to standard, and they're constantly being challenged. He has to meet with them on a regular basis, and he's trying to hold them accountable, starting in the performance management process. And in the midst of it is he had a family issue. I think one of his family members got really sick. He had to go to Europe for a couple weeks. And so he asked his boss, "Hey, I have this happening. I need to go." He didn't ask, he just said, "I need to go." And his boss said, "Sure, yeah, of course, do that." Right. And so he was gone for 3 weeks. And so people were covering for him and things like that. And he came back and he was almost apologetic and timid, and you know and he said, "Yeah, we covered for you while you were here. Let's talk about how you can get back up to speed." And his staff member said, "I really appreciate you doing this. I've never seen this side of you."
Mm.
And he says, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, I've never seen you on the human aspect of my family and things like that." And
Right.
he says, "Well, you never talk about your family." He goes, "Well, you never ask about my family." Right. And when he talks about his other staff members, they're all family because they were all there before the pandemic. They were all in the office. This person got hired during the pandemic, was remote, and still has a job where they're mostly remote. And so that lack of connection, right, where now there's a performance issue rather than really, because he talks about the rest of his family, the rest of his work is work family, right? And so this is one person who doesn't fit in. Well, first of all, he probably has FOMO. What's going on at work that I'm missing out on?
Right.
Everyone seems to be going to lunch and having happy hour together. I'm out of the loop. And then whenever I hear from my boss, it's always about something I did wrong, right? So, I was like, well, what are some things that you can do to help bring that person in? And he said, well, I'm not sure. I said, well, just think about what did he say when he came back? I never saw you in that way. I've never seen you on that human side. So what do you think he's asking for? So, well, maybe, if I, you know, talk to him a little bit more and get to know more about him. I said, okay, cool. And how often does he come in? Well, he comes in a couple times a week. Maybe you can make that special for everyone, right? How can you make that special where we can all connect? Well, I hadn't thought about it because we're all connected except for this one person. Yeah, so this one person might need to feel like we're doing something as a group to help connect as a group, right? So that was part of their plan was to start doing, you know, outings, lunches, right? Maybe the
Mm.
2 days a week that they have to go in, maybe one day is a lunch where they all connect and not sit at separate tables and have real conversations as a team, right?